He certainly likes the quick stuff.
Especially when getting paid.
Well, welcome to the Sky Sports podcast for the start of the Test series here in England. It's England versus the West Indies. I'm Mel Jones. I'm joined by Kumar Sangakkara and Ian Bishop. Let's go back to the start of the day's play. After 187 tests, 700 wickets, I can't even think of the amount of warm-ups Jimmy Anderson has done. It's the beginning of the end for one of the all-time greats. Unfortunately, though, no one told Gus Atkinson, because he sort of took the shine off Jimmy Anderson at the start of the day, taking 7 for 41 to begin with. But let's go back to Jimmy to start with. There would have been a few nerves and a little bit of emotion in the change room prior to him finishing or starting his final test.
Yeah, there would have been, and you could see that on his face. His family was here, the daughter's ringing the bell. It's been built up on the news. And just from the initial conversation itself, that would have been hard. Having that with Brendan McCullum, perhaps Rob Key as director of cricket, and the realization that, yeah, this is the end. But having said that, I think what better place to finish than here at Lord's in front of such a crowd of passionate cricket fans, and have, you know, one last occasion to show his skill and showcase his skill. It would have been equally tough for Gus Atkinson, as you said. You know, it's all built around Jimmy in the last test, and it would have been hard for him also to adjust. But perhaps may have taken the pressure off him because the expectations are now on Jimmy to be the center of focus. And Gus just showed how good he was with his pace, his control, and his skill. And I think it's a kind of a testament to what Jimmy has contributed to English cricket, to see other fast bowlers now ready to take up that mantle.
Yeah, I know we're talking fast bowls at the moment, but we do still have about 10 or so minutes to go in the Test match, and we're going to see some spin for the first time today. No spin from England, the first time that Modi's coming on as well. Ian Bishop, I know you're in the lovely, what would you call that, a dark grey at the moment, but underneath is a little bit of maroon, depending on where you're from. How did you find it for both Jimmy and Gus today?
Oh, look, there are a number of layers and nuances to Jimmy Anderson's entire career, but I'm glad he came. The world is glad that he came. He may have wanted to go on a little bit longer, but he certainly has left a legacy, and I would imagine even for a player like him, signalling the end of what he's done so well and so beautifully for 20 years, there's kind of a little feeling of a downer, because you're so good still at what you do. But I'm happy that he had the opportunity to be celebrated and to be shown the appreciation. And then with him exiting, as I said before, stage left, perhaps what we've seen from Gus Atkinson is a guy who's grabbing the opportunity as England look to fill that breach. I'm not saying he'll be as good, but at least he started magnificently.
Let's have a chat about the teams, Kumar. Let's go start with England. So, two players debuting today in Jamie Smith and Gus Atkinson. It felt like, and I spoke to Ben Stokes at the coin toss, a little bit of changing of the guard for England.
Yes, and I understand why they do that. One is, of course, as Bish mentioned, planning for the Ashes, planning ahead, life beyond Jimmy Anderson, and then earlier on Stuart Broad. That combination has been so good for England. Sometimes you can kind of back yourself into a corner thinking, let's go on for as long as possible and not look at anyone else. But England's made that change. I think, funnily enough, Jamie Smith's debut for Surrey, I think, was at Lord's, and I might have given him his cap then. But to see him being debuted is another huge plus for England. You can see the way they think, the subcontinental conditions that they will face on away tours requires a lot of keeping skill. Whereas here in England, in Australia, in New Zealand and South Africa, a lot of the time it's fast bowling. The ball stays above waist height, and so you need a person who can bat in that role at 6 or 7 and control a game and take a game away from the opposition. And they've identified Jamie Smith, and rightly so, I believe, having watched him, as the person to do that. Unfortunately, as we've seen since the advent of the Adam Gilchrists and the MS Dhonis, the specialist wicket-keeper role has been completely redecided, reinvented, and redefined. So, and unfortunately for specialist wicket-keepers, it's the same as we've seen in the formats of cricket that are being played now. You have to get with the times. You've got to upgrade all your skill, And batting and keeping makes you a real all-rounder and increases your value to your side, so you can't rest easy anymore.
Yeah. The last time the West Indies played a test match, they beat Australia at the Gabba. A couple of changes, though, coming into this test as well. Mikael Louis, the first player from St Kitts and Nevis, playing today as well. So a couple more changes. No Greaves and Jason Holder came back in after declining the tour down under. And then Gudikesh Moti and Jaden Seals into the side. Jason Holder coming in at 6, it sort of shortens up that batting lineup when there's a little bit of inexperience at that top order. Do you think they've got the balance right?
I'm not sure what the alternatives would have been. Kevin Sinclair was one who played a handy knock in that Brisbane Test match. And he would have extended the batting, whether you're considering him as a replacement for Jason Holder. Jason Holder has 3 centuries in Test match cricket, including a double, right? So
2 against England.
Yeah. So I can see why they trusted that. Seals missed that Australia tour because of injury, and the way he's gone in county cricket for Sussex this year, in the absence of Kemar Roach, he probably would have missed out if Roach was here. Yeah. He was probably the one that would have missed out. So good to see him in and bowling well on day 1 of the Test match. The real challenge, is for the 2 Josephs. Alzari, the leader of the attack, still has inconsistencies about his bowling, but he's played so much white ball cricket since January this year, as well as Shamar, that you almost see them striving for their best rhythm and their best control.
Yeah, okay, let's go back to the first session of play 2, because there was a huge cheer when Ben Stokes won the coin toss today and elected to bowl first. It was always going to be a little bit tricky for the top order for the West Indies to try and get themselves in. There was a period there that the openers looked pretty good, but then England picked up those 3 wickets in the first session.
I thought the West Indies openers, and this is true with Craig Brathwaite and Mikael Louis. I read an interview of Brathwaite where he said, I'm going to bat my own way, and he has a very specific style, as we've seen. The 100 he scored in, I think, was it Barbados against England a few years ago. 160 off, I think, 489 balls. And he was saying, I'm not going to change the way I bat. I'm going to take my time and I'm going to play this kind of innings. Mikael Louis looked technically very good. He was very well aligned in terms of his stance. He had good control of his hands. So there's a lot of promise there. The only thing I would probably want to see from the West Indian batting coach and the coaching unit head coach, along with those batters, is to have a chat about, can we have a batting lineup where everyone bats the same way? And are we really going to focus as much on seam and movement and the challenges of playing in England rather than on the opportunities of scoring amongst that in England on these pitches? Because you have to strike a balance. There's only so long you can defend and leave before the inevitable happens. And to delay the inevitable, you have to reverse pressure by scoring runs. And you've seen that is one of the reasons why England play this way. Now, West Indies does not have to play like England. They have their own brand of cricket. They have their own flair. They have their own capabilities and abilities. You've got to take advantage of that. I would like them to really assign those roles. Like, when you're attacking, be absolutely decisive. It helps to be decisive in defense as well then. And it creates opportunities for batters to really impose themselves on the game and score the runs required. Whether you batting for time in Test cricket anymore, especially in the first innings, I think is now gone. You bat for runs. And perhaps that's a conversation they can have and train and practice and prepare for that. But the bones of a good batting unit is definitely there in that West Indies lineup in terms of technique, temperament and ability.
I see you nodding along. I also see Ben Stokes on the screen there as well, and he's back bowling. Wardy said on the comms, Journo said, whatever surgeon sorted out the knee, knight them. But it was great to see him back with the ball.
Yeah, I mean, look, he adds great balance and depth to the England team, and with the uniqueness of his action, many times I watched him miss my eyes and thought that's certainly going to slide in from outside the off stump, and then it hits and it decks away. So just to have himself as an option after the other guys have bowled, with his experience as well, and with Jimmy now exiting after this Test match, it gives a ballast to the bowling attack, in addition to his batting and his captaincy.
Yeah, so they hit the end of the first session, and at lunch, the West Indies were 61 for 3, and they had a little bit of a platform there. They got through the tricky moments in the morning session, and then it all went a little bit pear-shaped, didn't it? Because they got to 88 and they lost 4 without the score progressing. Atkinson was on a hat-trick. It was all happening. When we've chatted about him already, but there was, I guess, in a way, a simplicity about the way in which he went about things. But he just kept asking question after question, didn't he?
He did, and that's what was really interesting watching Atkinson, because I watched him before and they've used him in very different ways to shake batters up, to use his pace. But today, perhaps because of the reality of Jimmy Anderson not playing beyond this, was a good test to see whether he can temper that pace with control and skill. And I was also surprised that Ben Stokes, who usually changes tactics every 5-over block or so, went for so long with such a set field. We've seen a whole session of bumpers, fast bowlers being used differently, the bouncer being a huge plan of attack. And with Atkinson and having Vokes, Anderson, and Stokes there, they still used Atkinson very traditionally in terms of skill and their line and length. So that kind of forced pressure on Atkinson actually forces him to grow, makes him stay to plans and then work on skill. And I thought that was great to see, and it paid dividends.
Yeah, West Indies lost 7 for 33, and that's going to be the big challenge for the West Indies throughout this series. Sorry, Bish. Sorry to remind you about that. You've got to win sessions of cricket, don't you?
Yeah, and particularly with the bat, being able to put enough runs on the board for their bowling attack to bowl to has been a challenge in the past. The one time they went above 300 in recent times against Australia, they actually won the test match, but they don't get above 250 often enough. And doing the little things for much longer with the bat is going to be key in these conditions for a very young and inexperienced middle order. So I just want to just confirm what you said. You used the word there with Atkinson, where he said simplicity. Glenn McGrath, from your place, always said, don't overcomplicate bowling, keep it simple. Atkinson did that.
He certainly did, and it meant that the West Indies were bowled out for 121, which meant that the England openers had to come out at the back end of the second session. Duckett lost his wicket just before the tea break, but then it was over to Ollie Pope, and he teamed up beautifully well with Crawley for an important partnership that really sort of started to set the platform for England.
Yeah. Look, there was some aggression from both batters. There were also some close calls with a few LBW shouts, playing their aggressive game. And once you get to the West Indies total and you get past, then you can afford to assert your authority even more. But there are still one or two things the West Indies bowlers will look at, with Pope falling across his stumps, with Crawley a little bit loose outside the off stump as they go forward later in the series. But for now, I think we've seen two talented batters who gave England a foundation to work with.
And that was a close one as we're getting towards the end of play there. We've got Jason Holder bowling to Harry Brook at the moment. Jason Holder, one of the big conversation pieces was about just how wide he is on the crease, and Nitin Menon had a lot of LBW decisions in particular to try and figure out whether or not they were missing leg or hitting.
Yeah, he did, and the key to that angle is length. The fuller you are, the more chances of hitting the stumps, as we saw. And if you're just shorter of that length, even though it looks out initially, more often than not it's missing leg stump. But to be fair to Jason Holder, he has bowled beautifully. He's troubled the batters consistently. His height also helps. And because of that length and the fullness of his length, that's where your head goes over. He's wide on the crease, so you're leading with your head at the bowler rather than at the ball. So all of these attributes have created issues for England. But I agree with Bish. If the West Indies keep hitting that line and length, staying patient, the England batters give you a chance. If the ball swings, it gives you a chance. If it nibbles, it gives you a chance. So they're right in it. And I agree with him. If they score over 300 to 350 runs, I think they'll be very competitive.
They're in it if Shamar Joseph stays on the field. A little bit of worry, isn't there, about the groin? The last test he played was the Gabba. He's played a lot of short-form cricket at the moment. A little bit of a concern?
It would have been a concern coming in that he missed the warm-up game because he's been, if not played a lot of white ball cricket, T20 cricket, he certainly practiced a lot of T20 cricket because he was in the IPL, played one game, played a couple of games against South Africa, didn't play at all during the World Cup. So he's short of that patience and that rhythm for red ball cricket. But I don't think they had a choice but to play him here. And just to finish, touch on Jason Holder. We've had that discussion. I've had that discussion with Jason about bowling wide of the crease. He thinks it accentuates his leg cutter and his away swinger.
Yeah.
The downside to it is that one that nips back. The angle is very steep. So what I'd ideally like to see him do, stock ball from wide of the crease, that's where you're comfortable.
Yep.
But occasionally, once or twice and over, drift mid-crease for me and create an angle to supplement the wide of the crease.
Mr. Bishop has spoken at the end of the day's play here at Lord's. England are leading by 68 runs. They're ready to bat day 2 tomorrow, which they say usually is the best time for batting. A quick word on tomorrow's play, particularly for the England batters.
I think they'll just continue on as they did. One of the telling things on the balcony was Stumps called, Ben Stokes applauding, and gives a big congratulatory kind of handshake to Pope.
Yep.
The old notion of, oh, he should have got more runs, is gone out of the England dressing room. Whatever runs you get them quickly, take the game away, get better on the field. That's what we'll be looking at tomorrow.
And for the West Indies?
They're a resilient team. They're a resilient bunch. We saw that in Australia, so I think they'll assess big time what's required in terms of patience, in terms of consistency from the two Josephs, and fingers crossed for West Indian supporters tomorrow is a more consistent day of creating pressure.
Yeah, well, it started all about Jimmy Anderson and the start of his last Test match here today at Lord's. It went over to the debutants who played superbly well. Then it was Gus Atkinson with his brilliant debut series, picking up 7 wickets. Went over to Pope and Crawley, who set things up very, very nicely for England. They lead by 68. Will they build a foundation tomorrow? We'll wait and see. Thanks for joining us today. We hope to see you tomorrow.